Okay. And that should be it. We should be live now. I've not really got anything I can monitor. Okay. The chat with. And that should be it. We should be live now. I've not really got anything I can monitor. Okay. What? Ah, I get that. Okay. Yeah, I've not really got anything I can monitor the chat with. So I've kind of got my phone up with what I think the chat window is on. Oh, I can hear myself again. Why can't I hear myself? If you can tell, I haven't really live streamed before. Okay. I don't know why I can hear myself. Uh, okay, I think I might just have to live with the fact that I can hear myself. Okay. So we are starting. Oh, that's really off-putting. uh, it's you. There we go. Okay, it's gone now. I can live comfortably. Okay. So I've not really got a format planned for this or anything. We're just going to kind of roll with it, see how it goes. Apparently, we've got 2 people watching, which is brilliant. But the video is going to it will save itself as a video on my YouTube channel, which I might edit up real quick, just so it's a bit cleaner. So you can kind of go back to this. But we are going to be going over this sleep video that I made that I put on my Instagram a couple weeks ago. Where am I looking? In here. Okay, so this is the video. Cool. Okay. So that's what we're going to be working around. So this is 100% in Blender, using Eevee instead of, so it's all pretty much real-time rendered using assets from Turbo Squid and Mixamo. So I'll open up the blend file of the final project here, so you can have a look at that. And then we'll kind of scratch that and we'll go totally from scratch to recreate it. So this is what it looks like inside of Blender. So I'm using 2 windows here, one for editing and one for viewing what my camera sees. So you can see, get all the same angles inside of Blender. We're not having to go into an NLE like Premiere or Final Cut to have to edit between those angles. We can do it all inside of Blender and just export straight from there. Okay, so what we've got here is, oh, everything's locked. Okay, so we've got our character over here and he's falling. That animation of him falling is actually totally static. That's him. He's just standing in one place doing those falling animations. And then his model as a whole is, I believe, parented to this empty here. which is animated to, yeah, there we go. So if I go on the character himself, you can see there's not really any keyframes just because it's imported data. He's just imported with that animation. But if I go to the empty that he's parented to, we've got the animation of him going down, and that's what's making the body move down. Then we've got, I believe, 3 cameras in the scene. So we've got a wide camera, which is this first angle we see here, which is also animated to come down. It's following the character down. We've got a top angle, which it cuts to there, who is kind of doing a parallaxing motion, so this camera's coming up as he goes down. So that comes into motion here. So we get that nice sort of parallax as he moves down towards that bottom text. And then we cut to a third camera here, which is at the bottom beneath the character, following him as he falls. So going a bit faster, going down. We've got 3 text zones, which are here. So this is our first round of text saying, I don't want to sleep. We've got the text that's above him, no, below him, sorry, because I've had enough. And then above him there, of the same ugly dream. So we can actually watch that. We've got, I don't want to sleep there. Then below him, because I've had enough. And then above him, we'll have the same ugly dream there. Cool. And then we end at 425 frames. That's the full length of our animation. We've got 4 viewers now. Look at that. We've doubled in viewers. Okay, so that's the text, the character, and the cameras. Then we've got our skull here, which is animated to rotate down, following the character as if he's watching him, and his mouth opens. Almost like an I'm gonna eat you sort of motion, and we've got a light inside of his mouth, which if we look at the rendered view is giving us that kind of shine that we're seeing inside of his mouth there. That's how we're getting that. So that's just a large point light that's been given a massive radius and quite a high strength to shine off of this guy's teeth. Cool. And what you're seeing here that's all kind of freaking out and not playing the way it should, I don't actually know why that's happening, is that's all our flyers that if we look at the original animation, you guys are gonna get really sick of this song. These flyers that are flying around just to kind of add something into the scene, which are actually, they've got this little I don't want to sleep really quick poster design that I mocked up in Photoshop. That's got that mapped onto those, and they're kind of flying around the scene. So they're with a cloth simulation with like a bunch of subdivisions and a force field down here, which is what you can see there.
Are you able to put this in my phone?
Not right now.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. So and this force field is throwing them all over the scene. Which is kind of simulating the wind for the cloth. Okay, so just save that, and let's start on the scene totally from blank. Hi, Tommy. Lol, you too. Okay, so just destroy all this stuff because we don't need it. And the first thing we need to do is mark out the scene. So I'm going to open a new workspace, a video editing workspace up here. And I'm going to take the song. So I've got the MP3 of the song downloaded here. I just ripped that from YouTube using a video downloader, just as an MP3 file. I'm going to pop that into Blender, into the video editing tab. And Blender handles video and audio files like this really well. You can swap between all your different layouts, and it will just transfer between all your different layouts, which is super handy. Okay. Sorry, I'm kind of going back and forth between this and my phone and other stuff. So what we need to do is mark it out first, and we can just do that by playing through the song and just marking out all our words, or every lyric of the song. So I'm just going to play it out so I can listen to it. I know this song pretty well. And just get an idea of where each lyric is. And then by pressing M as I go through, I can just mark out each of those lyrics. So okay, so what happened there is our animation is cut to 250 frames, so we need it to be a bit longer. So I'm just going to bump that up to like 450 frames using the start and end points down here. Okay, and then we're going to end there. So that is cool. So I can just grab my video or audio file, sorry, just bring that back down to here. So I'm looking at 15 seconds on the dot. So we're looking at 24 frames a second. So 15 times 24, so we're looking at 360 frames. Nope, obviously did that wrong. 435, 410, 405. I'm just guessing there. That'll do. So keep our audio trimmed to there. Okay, so now we've got all these markers down here that are highlighting our lyrics. They're going to be slightly out just because of my reaction times, so I can just grab all of them, just shift them over a few frames. And Blender's marker system will. So I can just come here, and if I press a marker, I press Control M, I can rename it. So we've got I don't wanna. I can delete this marker. Sleep, and I deleted that just because I was pressing on syllables. So we've got slightly out now, so bring it back a bit. That'll do. We're only doing this quickly. Okay, so come up and do this section. So because I've had enough, delete that one, move that over a little bit. Cool, so that's that bit. So we've got of the same ugly dream. Move that over a little bit. Cool. So got all that. So if I come back to my layout tab now, down in my dope sheet, this is just the default layout workspace. Everything here is default, so it should be the same as what you would see. We've got I don't want to sleep marked out there, because I've had enough marked out there, and the same ugly dream marked out there. Again, that's not necessarily going to be perfect, but it will do. Okay, I'm just going to shut the door really quick. Okay, so it's just going to keep opening itself. That's a shit door. So if we go back to the original animation, so the first thing we should do is probably mark out this guy. So where he's going to be, falling out, so we can block out where everything else is going to appear. So what I've got here is this falling.fbx animation, which is taken from mixamo.com. So we've just got this pretty blank character doing a pretty blank animation of him falling. So yeah, if you were to go to mixamo.com, this is a super handy resource. If you've got an Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, it's totally free. I have to log back in. And you get access to loads of free 3D characters and animations that you can assign to them. Easy to download as FBX or OBJ files, whatever you need. And also you can rig your own models and stuff really easily. So yeah, if you were to just search falling, you get a whole bunch of different these falling animations. So that's the one I've got here. And you can choose your different characters. So I can't remember which one I used, but it's just like a really blank default one. Right, then you got, doesn't really matter, but you can choose whichever one you want. It just saves time using resources like that. So I'm just going to copy the directory where I've got all that stuff saved. And if I go to File, Import, FBX, go to that directory, falling.fbx, we get our rigged model doing his falling thing. Okay, so there are loads of keyframes surrounding this model that for some reason we can't see here. I'm not sure why. So we don't really want to animate the model itself because otherwise it will mess up his falling animations. So this is where parenting comes in really handy. So we can go to Shift A, get the add menu, add a new plane axis, and just move that up to our character. If we take the character, then select the empty, go to Object, Parent, Object. I might have done that the wrong way around. So empty, armature, object, parent, object. There we go. So now our character is parented to this empty, and wherever we move this empty, the character is going to follow. Cool. So I'm just going to go to this orthographic view here, select my empty, turn on auto keyframing, which is this button here. Go fairly high up in my scene around here. Press I for a new location, for a new keyframe. I'm going to add a new location keyframe onto the empty, not the character. Come down pretty much to the end of our animation, maybe a bit past it, and just move our character down to here. So now we've got the falling character falling through 3D space, and he's doing his twirls. Turn off auto keyframing so we don't cause any damage to the scene. And I might actually, yeah, okay. So let's leave that. Got our falling character. Okay, so let's add a camera just so we know our framing. So it's going to import at an angle. So if you just default all these rotation values in the properties panel to 0, then there's nothing to worry about there. Hold Control while you're rotating and it will snap. So snap that to 90 there, and then I'm going to bring my X up to 90 as well. So let's push our camera back. I'm going to open a new panel up here. So if I just go to the top right, open a new panel, and go to the camera view. So this is what our camera is seeing. You can see our character's coming there. So he's just about to come into frame. There he is. Okay, so I'm just going to move a little closer on that. And I'm going to start just below the character, press I, add a new location keyframe, turn on auto keying, and I'm going to track the character down to the end of the animation. So there. Okay, so now if you watch, so we're always just a bit below the character. So what we might need to do is just change the, I'll add a new keyframe in here where it's just going to slow down to let the character catch up a bit. So it's going to come down to about there. There we go. So our first keyframes are fairly slow, lets the character catch up into frame. And then by our last one, he's going to be in central framing. And you can mess around with these to get different results. Okay, and that's pretty much as we're going to use that camera anyway, because we're only using it for that line. So that's our blocking for that done. So let's add another camera. Okay, and we're just going to do a similar thing where just get it rotated up to the angles we need. So that looks about right. Okay, so what we can do, a really handy feature to switch between cameras in Blender, is if you just add a new marker, or not. There we go. Then you can bind the marker to a camera, and that will essentially tell Blender to cut at that marker to the next camera. So have that marker selected, maybe call it camera cut or something, I don't know. So you go to marker, sorry, select your camera, marker, bind camera to markers. So now we're on this marker. So now we've got this camera. But what you'll see is that we've got now the whole scene is going to stay on this camera. So if you add we need a second marker at the start that's going to tell Blender to start on our other camera. So cam 1, select our original camera, marker, bind camera to markers. Cool, so now at the start of the animation, we're on our first camera, character falls into frame, then when we hit this marker here at 120, it cuts to our second camera. Cool, so now I'm just going to animate this camera. So new location keyframe to fall down with the character. Cool. So I'm just going to keep that going a little longer just so we get a smoother animation. There we go. So now we can see we've got our two cameras animating, following our character, and we can cut between them. Great. So we have one more camera, so we're just going to do the exact same thing. So camera, zero out all the rotations, and that pretty much puts us exactly where we want it anyway. Turn off auto keying. So, because I've had enough, and then we're going to cut to the next camera about here. So frame 280, marker, camera selected, marker, bind camera to markers. There we go. And I'm going to animate this camera as well. So to start down here, I for location keyframe, auto keying on, and go to the end of the animation and pull up. I'm going to move this marker back a bit as well. And you can see our third camera is now moving up there with the character. Okay. So so now our scene's fairly well blocked out, and I don't want to change where these cameras are moving. So I'm going to turn on the selectable restriction toggle, disable that for the cameras, and add a new collection called cameras. Let's throw them in there, lock that. Cool. So now we can't select our cameras, so we're not gonna accidentally touch them or anything. I'm gonna lock the empty and the character as well, so we don't accidentally muck about with any of that. So can't select anything. Save that as well. Okay. So I'm just going to save the project now, so because we don't want to accidentally lose anything. So okay. So now we need to start putting in our text. So we're going to start on our first line here. Okay, so if we go to the Shift A menu and just add in text, then we get some text here. Oh, it's defaulting to putting it in there. We want it in this general scene collection. Okay, so if we go to edit mode while selecting the text, then that's when you can just type and put anything in there. So our first line is I. Let's just rotate it. So that was just pressing R, then R for rotate, X, and then the value you want, so RX90. Let's push I back here and just bring that up into frame of our camera. So looking at our camera view up here. Okay, so scale it up a bit. Cool, so that's about where we want it. Now if we go into the font section of the properties panel, you can select a font file. So I've got my font folders marked off here, so we can choose any font we want from here and use those. So I'm just going to search for something simple. I can't remember what the original font I used was. I don't know, what's this like? We don't want that. I think that's the Doja Cat font. Or maybe that one. Where's the other one? Fonts. Let's just use this basic font. Okay, so if you press Shift D, we can duplicate that. Press Y, move it over. Sorry, actually we should add our 3D stuff first. So if we go to geometry in the text thing, then we can extrude from there, and then we can get our our 3D text, so it's not just like a 2D plane. So let's have that about there. Now duplicate it, move it over. And we've got don't again, and wanna. Get that roughly central. Use this one, and we've got sleep. Okay, I'm just going to scale that up. I think that's how it was in the original. Yeah, I don't want to. Sleep was bigger. Cool. Okay, so now we've got our 3D text, and we can go back and edit this at any time. So if we need to change the lyrics or whatever, we can go back and change that. Okay, so got watch now. Got our text in 3D space. Character falls past it. Cool. So now what we need to do is make the text pop up every time so in time with the actual line. So we've got there's a few ways you can do this, because there's a bunch of different things you can animate. If you go up here to the restrictions tab, you can animate the viewable in render tab, so you can animate that on and off, so it comes only on at a certain point. The way I tend to do it though is just with the scale property. So if we come down to our markers, this is where the markers come in really handy. Come down to I here. So press I, add a keyframe for scaling. Got that there. Go back one frame, use auto keying, and then S0. So now it's at 0 scale, then over the course of one frame, it pops up to appear. So we've got I coming up at the right time. And then you just repeat that for all the letters. So I scaling back a frame S0, wanna, I scaling back a frame S0, and sleep. I scaling back a frame S0. So now if we watch back, there we go, we've got I don't wanna sleep. And handy, because they're keyframes, you can just drag those two, move them to anywhere, and then they'll appear, wherever you put those two keyframes. That's also why marking stuff at the beginning is important, because you can just animate everything to those markers and you don't even necessarily have to listen to the track, because you can just do it all to markers if you don't want to drive yourself fucking insane listening to the track over and over again. Cool. Obviously that's not exact because I'm just doing this really quickly. Okay, so I might just move all of these back a bit, because we can see now in our second camera angle that they're all still viewable. We can still see them all. So if we just move them back, and they're slightly out of frame. Obviously without auto keying disabled, so that they don't animate backwards. Okay. Are they not staying? Yeah, okay, so they're deciding they don't want to stay. So what we can do is if we do the exact same as what we did. So the reason they're not staying is because their last animation keyframe is telling them that's where they need to stay until they get a new keyframe. And we don't really want to add a new keyframe to all of them, because otherwise they'll move backwards. We don't want them to move backwards. So we can do the exact same as what we did for the character at the start, is if we add a new empty plain axis, put that kind of in the middle of the text, then grab all the text, then the empty, object, parent, object, oh no, other way around, empty, then all the text, object, parent, object, then we've got an empty that's linked to all the text and won't affect the keyframes, which is super handy. So we can move that around and it won't affect the original keyframes. Okay. So let's just, go to our second angle and move that empty back. And now they'll stay there. There we go, so now they're free. Okay, so we can still see them there, so just move them back a bit further. Okay. I just need to shut the door again, hang on. I've just moved the bed in front of the door so that the giraffe won't open it again. Okay. Cool, so somehow these markers have moved. So let's just grab those and move them back up here. think that's better. And we're just going to essentially repeat that exact process. So something, I mean, we can, instead of having to recreate all of them, we could just duplicate all of these. So they'll show up with their own empty, because I've had enough. But, I mean, if you wanted to do that, then you get all this crossover, and then it will affect the keyframes, and just a big pain in the ass. So we'll just take one of the text options, so one of the text objects, and move it up here. Let's make that close, and unlink it from its parent. There's probably a quick way of doing that. Why are you being difficult? Just put it back in this. Right, okay. Okay, let's just make a new text object. Like it takes that long. So, because let's go up here. Fonts. We can select the font we already had, because Blender will remember the fonts you're using in this current project. So you can just come here instead of having to go into the file browser, which is super handy. Extrude it a bit, scale it up, and let's put it where it needs to be. So we need to be above this camera, so that's the camera we're using. Okay. So if we rotate it along the x-axis, so Rx 180 degrees, then it'll flip it around. And let's position that. Let's go a bit higher. I'll use a flat orthographic view here. Okay. So cos I've had let's duplicate that one, move it down enough, spell that wrong, scale that up, double, and we'll put you there. Okay. So now we're looking at So we're just going to do the exact same process as we did for the last text. So I, for scaling, turn on auto keying, back frame S0. Oh. There we go. So now we've got it popping up. Go across, repeat that for all of them. I scaling back S0, had back to the marker, I scaling back frame S0, enough, and I scaling back frame at S0. Sweet. Okay. So I can see now as well that this animation for the camera doesn't go along long enough, so I'm just going to move that past the cut. Cool. So this is our animation so far. Nice. And now it's just a matter of repeating that process again for the last angle down here. So before I parent these to an empty so I can control them later, I'm just going to duplicate one of them and bring it down into view here, rotate it 180 degrees along the X, so RX 180 again, and then just put that into frame. Cool, so I've got that now for where I need it later. I'm going to set my new objects to active, selection to active, make a new empty. Okay, that didn't work. I can't remember what I was doing there. We'll do it to. Okay, bring that empty. We just ignore what I did there. Bring that empty up to these. Let's grab all of those text objects. Sorry, the empty, then all those text objects. Object, parent, object. Oh, done that round the way again. I always forget like the ways in which you need to do these parenting things. It seems to change every time. Object, parent, object. There we go. So now we've got an empty. I'll just call that because I've had enough. Let's take this opportunity to name all our stuff. So what empty is this? Where's that? We're looking at this one here. So that's I don't want to sleep. I don't want to sleep. Keeping everything named is always handy, so you don't forget what you're looking at, as with any kind of editing software. So we'll call this character null. Okay, so now I can see much easier what we're doing. I'm going to lock both of these text items here, just so I can't go in and accidentally change anything, because that's, and mess up the animations. Oh, turn off auto keying. I might make a new collection as well called text and put both of those in there so that we don't end up mucking about with those. Cool. Oh, that's interesting. How's that happened? Okay, what's going on? Okay, so what's happened there is I left on auto keying while I was moving this duplicate cos from there to there. So you can see now there's a third keyframe. So it's making this actually quite cool animation of that word moving to the position I wanted it in. So I'm just going to delete all these keyframes and leave it where I want it. So it's not going to move now. So it's of that line. So of Shift D X, move it that way. There. I'm going to go to an orthographic view here just so we can see better what I'm doing. Same. So yeah, there was a lesson there of to always leave auto keying off when you're not using it. Okay. So we're going down. So along the Y. Ugly. Scale that up. About there. Okay, so we need to fit in dream next to that. So ugly. Dream. Okay, so we want to make sure they're both in view of the camera. If I press full stop and then individual origins, I can scale them down of their individual origins instead of the cursor, so we don't get some weird scaling. Cool. I'll have the same ugly dream. Somehow they've all moved as well. Okay. So bring you up here. Okay. And now it's just a matter of repeating that exact same process again for this text. So this is where doing this kind of stuff can get really pedantic. Pedantic? Is that the right word? Don't think so. Tedious. So I scaling back frame. Oh, auto keying on S0, and yeah, of course that pops up. And repeat for all of those. So I scaling back S0, same, go to the marker, I, scaling back frame S0, ugly, I, scaling back frame S0, and the same here. And we've got of the same you dream. Again, not perfect because I didn't redo the markers perfect. I'm just kind of speeding through this to show you guys how I made this whole thing. Okay, so if we watch our whole animation back now, got our character falling, text 1, camera 2, text 2, camera 3, and text 4, text 4, text 3. And frame 500 is roughly where our animation would end. Ah, that's why somehow, oh, I know what's happened. So we were originally working at 24 frames a second. When I imported this animation, when I imported this animation, it's a 30 frames per second animation. So it's converted the sequence to 30 FPS instead of 24 FPS, which is not what we need. The issue is now if I was to switch this back to 24, I think everything would be out of line. Yeah, so that's where our markers and stuff would originally have been. So we've kind of messed it up, but that's okay. We can leave it at 30, and there's something we can do at the end to put it back to 24 if we want 24 instead of 30. Okay. What are we, an hour in? 50 minutes in. Okay. Cool. So let's take that last round of text that we had, get a new empty, move that down to our text. Ooh, turn off auto keying, delete that keyframe I just accidentally made. See, auto keying is destructive. Okay, empty, and then text, 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 objects, parent, object. Oh, I've done it around the wrong way again. Something it seems to change every time. There we go. And that's of the same ugly dream. Lock that so we don't change it, and lock the text. Cool. So that's us done, essentially, our text. And most of the blocking for the scene. So what we need to do now is add in the skull that we had in the background of the animation here. This boy. Okay, so we've got skull FBX. I'm pretty sure I got the skull from Turbo Squid. So if I go to, I mean, what you can do is literally just search free skull 3D model, or model one yourself. So you've got free3d.com, you've got Turbo Squid, Sketchfab. Although I think it's quite hard to get them from Sketchfab. I think they're quite difficult to download. There you go. You've got Skull V3, free. You download that as an OBJ, and you got a free 3D skull. And Turbo Squid, which I'm pretty sure is where this one came from. You got loads more, loads of different ones. You've got a gold one, and I think sometimes these ones will come with like textures as well that they've been made for. I feel like this is the one I've used without that texture. Yeah, I think that's the one. So we can't just drag and drop. So import, I believe it's an FBX. Yeah, we've got skull.fbx. Cool, so it's imported really small. So I'm just going to scale that up 8 times, double it again. Oh, what's going on? There we go. Now we've got a nice fat skull. Let's move that to the... Oh, somehow the teeth have gone all weird. That's okay. We can fix that, I'm sure. Move that to the back of our scene. Let's rotate it to about there. Let's bring him up. Phase him down a bit. So where did he start? I want his eye line to kind of roughly match this guy. I'm pretty sure there probably is a way you can rig the this skull to follow him exactly, but I'm not sure. There we go. So let's scale those teeth down from where we've accidentally made them too big. Looks about right. Okay. Even just having the skull in the background there is really cool. Even if we do lose him pretty much straight away. Oh, what's going on? Oh, drop back to 24. Let's go back to 30. I'm going to bring this along so we can see the skull more with this cut. Okay, so let's grab the skull. So as you can see, as I've imported this skull, it's actually parented to an empty, which is what I've been doing for pretty much everything. All my assets I've been making the whole time. It's pretty standard to have everything parented to stuff, just so it's easier to access and see what's what, because everything here is separate. The jaw, the teeth, and the skull are all separate. So having them all parented to one empty means we can control the whole thing. Whereas if I was to just select the jaw, I would only move the jaw, which is going to be handy for later on. Okay, so let's turn on auto keying. Let's move him up a bit. Oh, make sure we're on the empty. Let's add a rotation keyframe. So we'll do one there. And go to the end of our camera cut. Go to this orthographic view. Where's our character? There he is. So we're going to move him down to be looking down. And now we've got our skull tracking the character as he falls. Cool. And now we want the mouth opening. So the mouth is going to be the lower teeth and the jaw. And this is annoying where every single one of these teeth is an individual object. So what you could do is take them out of that parent and put them and reparent them to the jaw. I don't think I did that last time. I think I actually selected them all and animated them kind of on their own all at once. But yeah, let's try. Yeah, okay. So actually, we'll just do it how I did it before. So just go through, select all the teeth on the bottom row. We're only doing one animation with these guys. Oh, deselect. Ah, fuck up. Let's do it again. Get all the teeth. All the teeth. Ah, fuck's sake. Okay, easy way of doing this. Let's deactivate skull main, so we can't touch that. Up. Up. So that's all the lower teeth and the jaw. Okay. So let's go to a rotate box. Add in a rotation keyframe. Let's go to our last keyframe over there. And we'll rotate all this stuff. Ah, you fucker. Why is that happening? So what we want is for those teeth to go with the lower jaw. So I guess what we could do is do that, get the rotation right, deselect the lower jaw, grab just the teeth. So if I go to wireframe, box select, all that stuff. And then, oh, we're missing a tooth. Where is he? There he is. Let's come back over here and just move those. This is probably a really backwards way of doing this, to be honest, but It's gonna look really dodgy. Okay, so I moved the location as well, which was bad. Okay, so the jaw comes down, the jaw opens. So we need a location keyframe at the start for all of those. And then at the back, we have a second location keyframe there. So the teeth will kind of... I don't know what's going on there. This is what happens when you end up working with other people's models. You just kind of don't really know what's going on. It's just gonna snap. Okay, sure. Oh, we've got a... okay. What if we bring this before... Or put it on top? Okay, so we just had a double keyframe issue. Okay, now the teeth are going down. Nice, the teeth go down with it. You can see what's actually happening is because I've just done it weird and quick, the teeth go down and they actually sink into the bottom of the jaw. But it doesn't matter because we can't really see it. Okay. So watching that back. Got the skull go down, jaw opens, teeth go down with the jaw. All good. And now we don't see it again, so it doesn't matter. And we get all our other text. Cool. Okay. Okay, so now we can just lock that off. Let's move the skull back into the scene outside of the... Oh, all the teeth have come detached. Oh, teeth. Let's pop those back in there. There we go. Now they're where they should be. Oh, I accidentally moved something else in there. Yeah, okay. Accidentally moved one of the text parents into the scene tab. Okay. So let's move on to some texturing. Because if we were to look at it now, our scene in the rendered view on Eevee, your default to the Eevee render anyway, everything's pretty flat. So this is what it would look like if we were to export. Everything's really flat. We've got no lighting, we've got no anything, we've got nothing. So we need to add in the shading. So I'm pretty much only going to use one material for this whole thing, which I'm going to append over from my previous time I did this. I'm just going to select all these. So yeah, Blender's really handy for being able to append stuff from different projects. So when you've worked on a material or a model or something from a different project, you can append it, which is basically import, but for stuff from blend files. So if I get my original blend file here and append, then I get everything that's in that folder. So if I go to my materials, then I've got all the materials I used in that. So you can see I only actually used 4 materials. These are actually pretty much the same materials. So I'm just going to use the skull shader, append that. So if I was to go down to my materials tab now, select the skull head, and I can use the skull shader that I appended over. And we get this. Now, obviously that would be a bit of a cheat just to import it and not explain it. Okay. So if I go over to the shading tab, so this is a really simple shader. So in our node tree here, we've got a layer weight, and what the layer weight does is it works pretty much like CC find edges in After Effects, where it will sort of find, or it's really hard to explain, go around the edges of an object or change the weight of a material on an edge. So if I affect this amount, you'll see what I mean. If at 1, it's all of it, the entire object. And the further down I go, the less of the object it fills. So if I use 0.35, something like that, then it's only filling some of the object. In the rendered view, you see that looks quite cool. And then that goes into a color ramp, which you can use a color ramp just to affect the strength of different materials. So if I grab these different points, I can emphasize the strength of that layaway node. So I'll bring it kind of around here. So it's not really acting as an actual gradient, it's acting just as a control point. So that goes into a mix shader where we've got the principled BSDF, which is just the default shader with some simple settings. I've kind of made it a bit metallic with some quite low roughness so that it's glossy and reflective. And then an emission shader. Let's just put that to 19, which is the emission is what's giving that the glow. You can see without the emission shader, we kind of lose everything. So if we pop that back, then that gets controlled by the layaway. And then that just goes into the material output, and that's it. That's the that's the whole shader. It's super simple. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is just apply that to the rest of the skull. Really simple way of doing this, of applying a material from one object to another, because it's quite strange. Blender doesn't like to handle them properly. Is if I go to my skull, I'll just disable it really quick, the main bit of the skull. And select everything else, all the other objects there in the skull. Come back to the skull and select that last, then press Ctrl L. I can make links to materials. And now it's going to have copied over material from the last object I selected to all the previous objects I selected. So now we've got our whole skull using that layer weight shader, which looks pretty sick. Okay, yeah, so that's our camera view there. So we're looking pretty slick. And now I just need to do that for the text. So I'm going to come to my text. Oh, remember I locked it all. So we're starting with I don't want to sleep, so unlock all that. Let's add the skull shader, and if I press this button here, that will make a duplicate copy of that shader. So skull shader 01, you can see now we've got skull shader and skull shader 01, which means I can now edit this and it won't affect the original shader. And I'm going to make that the text shader. Pop over to the shading tab, and I'm going to leave pretty much everything the same, except I'm going to change the color of the emission, so it stands aside from the skull. And I'm going to make it a, let's go for like a purpley color. I think that's kind of purple. And I'm going to change the kind of the layer weight amount as well, so we can cover more of the letter where we can. Okay, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. So select these ones, select that one last, Control L, make link to materials. And now we've got that material applied to that text. Cool. So if I come back to my layout, now that the material is in my scene, I'm just going to do the exact same thing. So if I go to where I can see all the text, let's go to enough, because I've had enough, unlock that, enough, apply the text shader, bap, 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 that one last, Control L, make link to materials, there we go. And then the exact same to, let's turn off auto keying so we don't do any damage. And same ugly dream. So let's give it to dream. Remember to unlock your stuff. Text shader. Bap, 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 bap. Control L, materials. Check the rendered view. Yep. Cool. So now all our materials in, we can lock all the text back off, so we don't cause any damage. And let's go to rendered view on our camera. Cool, so now you can see we're getting that kind of vibe from the original animation. Okay, I'm going to go down to my character now. Let's unlock the character model, which is this one here. So this is the null we parented it to. This is the armature, which is affecting the animation, and this is the actual model, ch36, character 36. So let's remove that. Let's add the text shader one. Duplicate it again, so we're getting a different shader, and let's call that car shader, so character shader. Let's go over to our shading tab, and let's make him like a yellow. Colorblind gang unite. Yeah, cool. Okay, let's go with that. So now everything we want is shaded. We're pretty much very close to the end, almost at a flat hour. Damn. Okay. So the last thing we need to do is those flyers. So I'm going to add a new collection, flyers. Let's lock off all the collections that we're not using now. And I'm going to make a new plane. I'm actually going to hide all these as well, so I can't see them. So I'm only looking at this. What have I just done? Oh, there we go. Okay. So I'm only looking at the plane I've just made. Everything else is still there. It's just hidden. Okay. Let's scale that to be kind of the size of an A4 piece of paper. Yeah, the size of that a flyer would be. Okay. And let's make a new material. And on surface, switch that over to, nope, sorry, on base color. Click this icon here and click that to a image texture. Let's look at the rendered view so we can see what we're looking at. So obviously we now need to link the image. So we've got sleep poster 01, which is that poster I made in Photoshop, obviously, and then I exported it as this low-res JPEG here. Cool, let's apply that. And now we've got the poster pretty much, that lines up pretty much exactly how we need it to. But if you want to just make sure it's really perfect, or if yours doesn't line up, what we could do is go over to the UV editing tab. You'll get your image texture here. You can select all your faces, and then they'll show up here. So if you go to the rendered view, as I move this face, it will change the scale of that. Of the face, so you can map it exactly how you need it to. But mine's, that's pretty much perfect. Okay, so now this paper is going to be simulated as cloth. So we need to add loads of subdivisions to it because it needs to have loads of different edges so it can properly simulate cloth. So go to edit mode and basically just press R to add an edge loop, then scroll and just add a whole bunch of edge loops along that edge, and then do the same for up here, again here, R, add a bunch of edge loops. Cool, so now we've got loads of different faces on that. You can also do it just by clicking subdivide, and that will do the same thing. And then when you do subdivide, you can change the number of cuts in your subdivision, and that will do a similar thing. I just kind of went a long way around just to show you how it's actually done. Okay, so let's unhide all this stuff just so we get the right scale of the flyer. Okay. Come out of rendered view so we're not using too much resources. So that's probably about the size we want it to be. Let's duplicate it. Oh, so before we duplicate it, actually, go over to the physics tab, enable physics for cloth, and then that will pretty much do all the work for us. We don't have to touch it. If you were to play, you'll see, where is it? It's got really small, but it's simulating cloth down there. There we go. so it's falling because it's now a physics object. And if we were to add wind into the equation, which we're going to do in a little bbit, then it will fly all over the place and we'll get that look of paper. Okay, so I'm just going to duplicate this a bunch. I'm just using Shift D and then clicking where I want the duplicate to be. Let's grab all those, Shift D, rotate them a bit. Let's grab a bunch more, Shift D, rotate. Let's use the cursor instead of individual origins. So let's rotate them around like that way. Okay, so we've got all our flyers. Let's check the scene. Yeah, and you can see now they're all going to freak out. My computer's now panicking because it's doing lots of simulation work. Okay, let's turn all this stuff back on so we can see where we are. Okay, so let's grab all of our flyers and bring them up to just below the face there and add a new force field. I'm going to use the vortex force field. Am I? Yeah, fuck it. Cool, so make that vortex nice and big. Let's bring up the strength to 3. Just muck around with these settings. 50. You can experiment with these to get different effects and stuff. Now what we should have is our vortex should start affecting the cloths in. Okay, maybe it's not strong enough. Let's crank it up to 25. Okay, interesting. Let's see what happens if we try and let's bake all the dynamics, and then see if we get any change in the effect. So baking is essentially like a pre-render of stuff that's simulated. Let's escape out of that. Let's see if we've got any. So you can see now, because it's not having to render it every individual time, that we're getting smoother playback. Okay, so we're obviously getting no change. So let's delete all the bakes. I can't remember what force field I used last time. Let's just try a wind one. Let's see if we get any change. Those vortex ones never seem to work the way I want them to. Interesting. This is where the whole thing's going to fall apart. I'm not going to be able to find how to figure out this one bit. I'm going to look like a right dick. Okay. Oh, okay. Alright, well, I've kind of messed up anyway by not setting the original animation time. So I'm just going to delete all these except one. Let's check our settings. So simulation to last up to 500. Let's see if there's anything I'm missing around here. Doesn't look like it. Okay, let's just repeat that process of duplicating a bunch of these. Bring some of those up a bit so they're not on top of each other. Okay. Where's our wind gone? Did I delete the wind by accident? I did. Okay, so force field, wind, strength. Oh, watch me spend the next hour of this fucking live stream doing the one thing that should be like fucking quick. I'm trying to. Could it be that it's because it's not reaching the bottom? What do you want? Can you leave it at the door? Do it when I'm out. Let's try baking again. So, can I not bake in here? Google is your friend. Let's just flat out ignoring the force field. That's very interesting. Okay, well, I'm just going to ignore that for now, and I'll figure out what's going on there, and I'll post an update, because I don't want to end up wasting all my time on doing this. Could it be that? Delete the bake. No, okay. Right, let's just delete this. I'll come back to that with the flyer issue. That was strange. Okay. I mean, that pretty much leaves nothing. That's pretty much it done. Okay, so if we go to our world settings, we don't like this grey. Let's just make it black in the background. Maybe a very dark grey. Come up to our render settings, and this is where pretty much all the magic happens. Turn on ambient occlusion, screen space reflections, motion blur, and bloom. And you know, just the difference bloom makes alone is pretty crazy, where you get that real sort of lighting bloom. Motion blur, I'm going to turn samples up to 16, turn down the shutter a little bit, just to get a stronger motion blur. Let's try 32 samples. I mean, I'm not going to see all these in the viewport anyway, most of these will come to the render. And that's bad. Okay. Let's move this cut along. Okay, so the last issue we've got is that our character, his animations stop. The reason his animations stop is because the animation I downloaded, or we downloaded from Mixamo, is only a certain amount of frames long. And when it's out of those frames, the animation will obviously just stop because there's no more animation data to go from. So what we can do is we just come down to the armature, which is where all that animation data should be living. Oh, don't fuck with me as well. Man, everything's going wrong today, isn't it? Let's try looking in the timeline. Oh my god. Is it because you're locked? That's the null armature. Let's go back to the dope sheet then. Wasting so much time just by looking like a dick. Okay. Okay, I fucked up something there. Basically, I don't know why, but for some reason it's not showing up, but all the animation data should be in the armature, because that's the rig of the model. I don't know why it's not, because sometimes Blender just likes to fuck with you. I mean, I've got the armature selected and it's just not showing up. It should come up with loads of keyframes all along here. It just isn't, which is fantastic. I might have mucked around with some setting or something that's hidden it somehow. Yeah. This is great. This is great. We don't want object mode. Let's try. What if we look in the graph editor? See, how is it seeing no data? There should be loads of data for this animation somewhere. Should be right here. That's just our null animation. That's got the armature directly selected and it's still not showing up. Blender does this sometimes, it will just decide to not show you something. It's really annoying. Okay, but basically what would happen is you'd select the armature, it would show you all of the animation data for the animation you've downloaded, and you would just select all those keyframes, Shift D, duplicate them, and just move them to where the animation stops. And then the animation would just continue from the start. You might get like a little jitter from where it restarts, it goes back to the last frame. You can usually sort that by either deleting the first or the last keyframe of the previous cycle of the animation. But that's how you'd fix that. I don't know why mine's deciding to freak out. If you do get issues with it, drop me a message, and I'll try and help you out. Because this isn't a normal issue. It shouldn't really be like this. You should get that animation continuing. Okay, so let's just get our render settings done, so you can render this out and finish off. So go down to your output tab on the render preview. Go to where you want it. So I want it in the sleep folder, whatever you want the video file to be called. I'm just gonna have it as sleep live stream render. And file format, we're going to change that to FFmpeg video. This is for rendering it as a video file, so you don't get a weird, just a bunch of images that you have to then put into something like Premiere and re-export, and then you lose quality. Change video codec from Matroska, which is MKV, to MPEG-4, because MKVs fucking suck. The difference mainly that you're gaining, so if you render it as an MKV, if you have to cancel the render or stop it, it should still have the video rendered from up until where you stopped it. Whereas with an MPEG-4 or an MP4 file, which is H.264, if you stop the render, which is actually a lot more common than you think, where you just stop a render halfway through because you only need half of it, you'll lose the whole file. It won't retain what it's already rendered. That's also a benefit of doing it as an image sequence, is if you render it as an image sequence, you won't lose what you've already rendered. If you stop the render, you'll retain all the images it's already done because they're individual files. Change the output quality from medium to perceptually lossless. Audio codec, you want the audio that you've got in the video editing tab, so make sure that's not no audio. That's something like AAC or MP3. I use AAC. You can change the metadata if you need, and post-processing denoising if you want, and then you can just go up to render animation, or Control F12, and that will just go through it and render your animation frame by frame. And you can see up in the corner here, it does it pretty quick because it's Eevee, so it's already on frame 10. It gives you the average time for each frame and stuff. There you go, we've got first letter showing up. So that would probably take less than 5 minutes. That's pretty much it. That's everything. That's the whole tutorial, other than the two things that I left out because I couldn't figure them out. If you were to use cycles, you would get a cool effect. It would look, and there is a way of getting bloom in cycles as well. Bear in mind, obviously, cycles is a lot slower. Despite being the better renderer, it is a lot slower, and you can see it's struggling to keep up, as well as Eevee did. That's it in one frame, whereas Eevee kind of just pops out frame by frame much quicker. But from what you can see already, it's hard to describe. Better lighting, better depth, especially when you add bloom into into cycles. I might do something for this on the difference between Eevee and cycles and using them. But generally, when you're doing stuff like this, you want to use Eevee, especially because when you're working on this stuff commercially, you'll have much quicker turnaround time, and you don't really have the time to use cycles. You want to use Eevee. Okay, that's basically it for today. I will try and make some kind of update for those two things that I couldn't figure out. Drop a comment if you enjoyed this, or get at me on Facebook or on my networks or whatever if you want to see more or specific stuff you'd want to see covered next week. Even though I know no one watched this, absolutely no one watched this, but it will go up on YouTube if you want to go back and go through it or whatever. Cool. So I'm going to end the stream there. Cheers.